The F-15C and Falcon BMS is an absolute banger of a module. It is one of the best F-15 experiences you can have across any flight sim ever in the history of flight sims. That being said, its radar is an absolute monster to use, especially if you're new to it. I don't claim to know everything there is to know about the F-15C radar and Falcon BMS, but I know enough to be competent and fly this jet effectively on combat missions, and I want to share that knowledge with you. I'm Hades11, and if you're struggling with the F-15C radar, this video is for you. Before we jump into the cockpit and show you the radar in the F-15C, we're going to use this online tool. I'll link it in the description. It's pretty awesome, and it helps you understand and learn the F-15C radar outside of a mission. Now, it was really built for DCS, so the symbology is going to be a little bit different, but conceptually it's going to be the same. We won't spend a lot of time here, but what I do want to point out is what we're looking at a little bit on the radar itself. So first and foremost, this screen here, this square, this B scope with these little captain's bars that we can move around are what we're going to be looking at most of the time while we're in the cockpit of the F-15C. These other views that we have in the top left, top right, and bottom right corner are theoretical views of what the radar is actually looking at in comparison to what we see in that bottom left-hand corner view. Now, these captain's bars that you see, these little vertical bars that we're moving around, that is called the target designator control. It is what we use in order to highlight targets and lock them up on the radar. It moves within the area that the radar can see for the most part. And in this case, that is 80 nautical miles out from the nose of our aircraft. We can tell it's 80 miles out because this 80 up here in the top right hand corner above the captain's bars tells us that we are at an 80 mile scale. That means this bar all the way down here at the bottom is 0. This one is 20 miles. This bar is 40 miles. This bar is 60 miles. This bar is 80 miles. If we change the zoom on the radar, now that's a 40-mile scale. You'll notice up here that we can see 40 miles on this arc, and the TDC is at the top of the scope, right? So that's 40 miles, which makes this bar down here 0, this one 10, this one 20, this one 30, this one 40. If we change the scale again, it's back out to 80. We can change it out to 160, and you kind of get the point. You can also see where in this like flashlight array the cursor is actually pointing. You'll notice that as it gets closer to the aircraft, the cursor itself gets smaller in height, right? This is less tall than it is way out here. And that is also reflected over here with these two numbers, 10 and 29, at this point 12 and 27. This is the elevation that the TDC is able to see. So 12,000 feet to 27,000 feet. There's not a real good way for us to actually move that around, right? We can only go left, right, up, and down technically with our TDC. So we will actually need to use our elevation controls in order to change that. So what that actually looks like, let's go ahead and zoom this back out, is if we're down here and we want to change the elevation on that, when we do change the elevation, we are actually angling the way the radar is looking up and down. And that's why we can see targets sometimes and we can't see targets other times. It's because how we're pointing this flashlight. So that's what happens when we're looking at this from like a flashlight sort of view instead of just the scope that we see in here. So when we change the elevation, we're tilting that radar up and down. And then as we're moving the TDC around, it is growing and shrinking based on how far out from the aircraft it is. And that is why sometimes we might be in a position where we see this aircraft here, right? And we can tell because it's green on the radar here. And other times we can't see these aircraft here, which we see them on this example as red. If we move this up and these targets are now in scope, you can see they kind of show up green for us on the radar itself. So basically we are looking for contacts on the radar and we will then lock them up. The last thing we'll talk about really quick is just azimuth. We see these two dots here, one in this corner, one in this corner down here. That shows us the width of the scan, which we can see here. It's a full 120 degrees width. If we were to do something like go into track while scan mode, you'll see that our azimuth changes quite a bit. It goes down to, in this case, like a 60-degree angle. And what that does is it changes how wide our search pattern is. So we are going to be able to search much quicker because we're searching less area left to right, but we are not going to get as wide of a picture. And all the rest of the stuff stays true. So if you see these circles changed width on your scope, it simply means that you are shining a much narrower beam. And on this tool, we have to go into track while scan rather than range while scan in order to show that thing happen. In the actual F-15, there are multiple ways that we can change the azimuth of our scan. Okay, before we jump too far out of this, there are a couple types of tracks that exist. We have a single target track, and then we have track while scan, right? These tracks are how we lock targets. So if I hover over a target and I lock it up right here, this is a single target track. You'll notice I can't really move the radar around anymore. It is pinned to this one specific target, and all the other targets are no longer in view. If they're red, we can't see them. It does not move, it does not track them. Ignore this symbology, it is different in Falcon BMS. That is what a single target track looks like. If we were to go into track while scan, for example, and I was to lock up one of these guys, like this guy here, you'll notice we can still scan around and move the TDC around as well as the radar itself because we are tracking while scanning. So we're tracking the target we have locked and we're still scanning for other targets. Now there's multiple advantages with track while scan outside of the ability to simply track and scan at the same time, such as if the enemy gets alerted that they're locked up or not. So a single target track takes over the radar completely until we drop that lock, and a track while scan target track allows us to track and lock more than one target, which is helpful if we need to fire at multiple things for any reason, which sometimes we do. We're able to have more than one targets tracked at any given time. That's enough of this conceptually. The most important thing is understanding that your radar is not this all encompassing 360-degree top to bottom world that we live in. In fact, it is a giant flashlight that has all these parameters that change within it. And if you're having a hard time finding enemies, I recommend coming to this site and just playing with it a little bit so that you understand how the different mechanics work when using the radar in the F-15C. I think 10 minutes on this site and you will understand why you're unable to find certain targets in Falcon BMS. With all that being said, let's jump back over to Falcon BMS and we'll look at this in a practical manner inside the sim. Like everything else in BMS, it is helpful to have a couple keybinds bound. In this case, we need to bind the multifunction switch up, left, and down. While you're there, you might as well bind multifunction switch right. Even though it's not used for the radar, it is used for your electronic countermeasures. During the course of this video, I call this the Coolie switch. It is referenced as the Coolie switch across multiple versions of documentation. So Coolie switch is multifunction switch. I make no attempt to offend anybody by using the term Coolie. It is just what is printed in documentation, and therefore it is what I have gotten used to. If it offends you that I say Coolie, my bad. Nothing else I can do about it. The next set of keybinds you're going to need is the auto acquisition switch forward, aft, and down. You're also going to want the elevation scan knob step up and step down. Now you can bind this in two different spots, but I promise you the radar elevation scan knob step up, step down options are much more comfortable to use, so go ahead and map those two. And lastly, you're going to need castle switch up. Now, again, since you're here, you might as well bind right, down, left, and press, even though we're only going to use up to make sure that we actually have the radar selected. Once you have those keys bound, you are ready to start working the radar in the F-15C. Okay, welcome to the radar. Here's a small caveat. In the keybind section, it's called the multifunction switch. In the documentation, that same switch is called the Coolie switch. So I might use those terms interchangeably. If I say multifunction switch or Coolie switch, it is the same thing. I'm going to do my best to say multifunction switch because of the sensitivity around the word Coolie. I don't want to offend anybody, but it is written in the documentation that way, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, before we dig too deep into what's going on the screen, let's talk about it. First, we're at 160 nautical mile scale. That means each one of these bars is 40 nautical miles. We are scanning from negative 24,000 feet to 58,000 feet, which is huge. We can see where in that elevation scan we are from this caret. These are called our bars, how many bars we're scanning. We can also see that down here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Ignore the high and medium. That is the pulse repetition frequency. It's the type of scan we are doing in BMS. We cannot change that right now. We are stuck on interleave. It is what it is. So we're going to ignore that. We also see our azimuth, these two circles here in the bottom corners, and this caret going between them, which shows us where we are on our left and right scan of our radar flashlight beam. Pretty simple. At the very bottom, we have our ground speed at 483 knots, and we have a bearing and range indicator for the TDC cursor in comparison to the selected steer point. And I know that's a mouthful. I'll do my best to explain it in a second. And then we also have our total airspeed, which I can't remember if it's calibrated or not, but 498 down here. We're going to use TDC slew to move the cursor. Here's the thing. If you're struggling to move the cursor, it's probably because it's down here on this screen and you're actually moving it around down here. If that's the case, you're going to press castle switch up and it's going to put it up on your radar. And if you want to get it back down to that screen, you're going to press castle switch up and it's going to put it down on your situational awareness screen. You press castle switch up again, it's back up on your radar. Easy peasy. The docs are wrong on this. You do not press castle switch down. If you do, it just centers your situational awareness display on you rather than like near the bottom of the screen. Okay, it's castle switch up. That is your way to bounce between the two. Don't let the documentation fool you. All right, let's take a look at this bra again. This is the relation of the cursor to the currently selected steer point. What I mean by that is simple. If I move the cursor around, that number changes, right? So if I wanted to say, hey, this contact is at 24231, right? It's at 24231. That means it's at 24231 from my currently selected steer point. Watch, if I change my steer point, which you're not going to see, those numbers change. Now it's at 15348 from my currently selected steer point. And if I do that, it changes and it changes. Unlike the Viper, when it comes to BMS, where you set like your bullseye steer point in the ICP itself, you can say like, hey, this steer point is bullseye, and then all bullseye calls reference that regardless of what steer point you have selected. The F-15 is not like that. You're going to get your bullseye information based on what the currently selected steer point is. So if you want to have an accurate bullseye from AWACS, you need to set a steer point in your flight plan that you can set your jet to when you're about to get into combat. That way your bullseye calls will be accurate. That's why we're going to see those numbers change. Okay. So we can kind of ignore them, but that's what they are. They're the relation, or they're the bullseye call essentially for your cursor in relation to the currently selected steer point. Don't get tripped up when you change the steer point. All right, we are scanning a crap ton of elevation. Let's hover over a contact on our radar and see what happens. We're going to hover this guy here that keeps showing up. You'll see that he's at 16,500 feet. It's very brief because of the way our scan is and how far out he is, but 16-5, 16,500. We come over to this guy, it's 15-0. So he's at 15,000 feet exactly. So we can change our scanned elevation by using the antenna elevation knob. So we don't need anything under like 6,000 if we can get away with it. So we're going to change that. That'll increase our scans just a little bit for us. You'll see we can move it down like this, but then we still have a huge range even though those contacts are within it. So we're going to set it kind of here and we'll see what happens. If I'm outside of that range, right now our bottom is 6,000. If I'm outside of that range, I won't be able to pick up any of these contacts, as a matter of fact. Let's do that. Let's bump this up to 33,000 feet, and you'll see that our radar is just going to scan continuously, and it's not going to pick up those contacts at all, no matter what we do. And that's because we're pointed above them, like we had in the example in the beginning. So if I bump this back down to where they're actually within that range, They're going to show up on the scope here in a second as soon as the scan gets to them. There we go. There's one. The other one should be showing up here any moment. All right, the next thing we need to know is like how to change our scan azimuth and how to change our scan distance before we move too far forward. So if I want to change my scan azimuth, I'm going to take my cursor and I'm just going to bump it to the sides. And you'll see now my azimuth has changed drastically. And if I kind of bump it over here, I might even be able to get both of these contacts at the same time. They might be spaced out just enough. Yeah, they're spaced out just enough where I can't get them both at the same time. But you'll notice that contact that was over here is gone because it's no longer in my scan azimuth. And now if I get this one, he shows up, but the one over here doesn't show up anymore because it's outside of the azimuth. So if I want to bump it again, I can come over here and do this. There is also a knob down by your throttle that you can turn to select an azimuth, but one of the quickest ways is to just bump this over to the sides. The same is true for your distance. If I want to bump it down, boom, now we're at 80 nautical miles, right? So now the scan is scanning at 80. If I want to extend that back out, I just bump this out, and now we're at 160. And I can do the same. I can just keep coming down, and we can come all the way in. But you'll notice that we'll lose the contacts, obviously, if the radar is not extended out far enough. Remember, this is not up and down. This is range that we're looking at. With all that being said, let's figure out which of these targets is hostile. In order to do that, we're going to take the multifunction switch and we're going to hit left. When we do that, a little A is going to show up in the corner. See this circle come back? That circle was a return, a high confidence return, as a matter of fact. If I do A again, we get a diamond. Why? Just because the confidence of the return is less. The diamond means a low confidence return. You should probably still count the diamond as friendly, but it's low confidence. The circle, however, means that it was a high confidence return. And if we're getting a return from a contact, odds are that's a friendly contact. But you'll notice how the circle is not directly over the contact brick, and that's because our radar is extended so far out that it's kind of guessing who that belongs to. Notice how the contact up here at the top, let's bump the scale out, we'll do it again, we'll IFF from here. The contact up here at the top is not giving us a return at all. No circle, no diamond. We can probably assure that that is a hostile contact, whereas the circle, we can be pretty sure that's a friendly contact. If it was a diamond, we might want to go through additional steps, like referring to data link or AWACS to get a better idea of who that might be before we take our shot. But the guy out here in the middle area is not returning at all, which means he's probably a big baddie McTaddy. And as such, he's ours to tinker with. All right, so let's lock this guy up. One of the ways we can do is we can press TDC Depress. That'll go into an acquisition mode like that. And all I do is move the cursor over the target and it's tracked. Easy peasy. We get a whole bunch of symbology up here though, which is super helpful for us. We can see that the target speed is 290 knots. I can't remember if that's calibrated, indicated, ground speed or whatever, but their speed is 290 knots. They are moving at 13 degrees to the right. That's their azimuth. So they're moving 13 degrees to the right of us. That is where they're pointed. That heading is actually 90 degrees. So we can see speed, azimuth, and heading. If we look at the target track itself, we got this circle here. This is our allowable steering error, and this is our little dot that we're trying to chase into that error for our missile. This is unrelated to the target. That's all about our missile. This information down here is mostly unrelated to our target. It's all about our missile. It's our dynamic launch zone. We got the launch caret. We have the different areas on the dynamic launch zone on when we should shoot our missile, and we have the rate of closure. This is actually kind of helpful because it tells us how fast we are closing in on the target or if the target is going away from us. In this case, they're coming at us and we are closing at a rate of 474 knots. If this number was negative, that would mean that the target is cold and moving away from us. If we look at the target track, we'll see it's now a box with a line, points to the direction it's going to go, and it has a little triangle over it. The triangle is kind of hard to see now, but you'll notice it later in the video. The triangle says that this is our primary data track. This is the target we will shoot at should we pull the trigger right now. How do we know? The little triangle above its head. Next, we see the words wait. Why are we waiting? Our system is trying to figure out what type of target this is. This typically shows up in one of three configurations. Wait, which means, hey, I'm trying to figure it out. Unknown, which means I don't have enough information to figure it out. Or the actual aircraft type, like MiG-29, which means, hey, I figured it out and it's a MiG-29. This is just one of those situational awareness tools that will help you not kill your friends. To drop the single target track It is simple. You're going to take your auto acquisition switch and you're going to press depress. Boom. And now we are back in search mode. Now, the second way to lock up a target in the single track mode is to move the cursor over the target. And once it's there, then do TDC Depress, and everything else is the same. Welcome to single target track mode. To break that lock, you're going to go auto acquisition switch depress. Congratulations, that's single target track. It's pretty simple. Let's talk about track while scan. To get into track while scan, there are two ways to do it. First, we can get a single target track on a target. If we have a single target track on a target, we can take the auto acquisition switch and move it aft, and that will put us in a track while scan mode. You can see down here, TWS, track while scan, or track while search, take your pick. We can move the cursor around, but notice that I can't go further left or right than the primary data track allows. If the primary data track is going to leave the azimuth of my scan, the cursor stops. This guy's my primary data track. How can I tell? There's a little triangle right over the number 9. That's my primary data track. But notice now I'm able to pick up more than one target. Watch what happens if I take the multifunction switch or coolie switch and I move it up. Boom. My cursor jumps to this. It's a buddy. Notice how he's not screaming at me, buddy spike? That's because he didn't get alerted that he's locked. That lock is just something I know about. But that little triangle moved. That says, hey, this is the primary track. And if I go coolie switch up again, bam, there we go. We're bouncing between the two targets really quickly, which is awesome if I need to fire 2 missiles in rapid succession, one to the other. But notice what's missing. The type of target is missing. I no longer see weight in the middle. While I'm in track while scan, I get no extra information about what I might be shooting at. So keeping good situational awareness is critical. The other thing you might have noticed is it changed our scale. Track while scan is only usable out to 80 nautical miles. Now, if I want to go back to a single target track, that's the third method here, it's the same thing. I'm going to go auto acquisition switch aft, and bam, now I'm back in a single target track. You'll see that my radar is bumped out to 160 nautical miles. It says wait as it's trying to figure out what it is, and I no longer have control over the cursor. So those are the 3 ways I can get to a single target track, as well as one way that I can get into a track while scan, which is to do auto acquisition switch aft while I have STT. To get out of this track completely, I can do it one of many ways. The first way is I can do an auto acquisition switch depress, which will drop the lock and put me back in search mode. Notice how there's no more TWS. If I want to get back into TWS from here, I can hold the TDC Depress. I'm holding that down. I'm going to press auto acquisition switch aft, and now I am in track while scan, but this is undesignated track while scan, meaning I didn't have a target designated first, right? So now we're just scanning. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, oh, like, let me get this guy. Now I could, where did he go? Come on back. Let's change our antenna elevation. That's why we lost him. He's back now. I could hover over this contact with the cursor and do a TDC depress. That puts me in a track while scan track on him. That works just fine. There's our other target. Or what I can do is I can take the coolie switch, the multi-function switch, and press it up, and it will automatically lock on to the most threatening target. Kind of. It actually only locks onto the closest target. This target's friendly, remember? So it's not really a target at all. So we can do coolie switch up, and now we're targeting the bad guy. So that's the other way that you can enter a track while scan track, is to use the multifunction switch up, and it will jump to the priority target. It could be wrong though, so be ready to switch. Now, if you want to drop track, but you want to stay in track while scan mode, you're going to do the coolie switch down, and that will drop the track on the target while keeping you in track while scan mode. This is super helpful because then you don't have to re-enter it, right? If you want to stay in Twiz, use the coolie switch to drop the track, right? Even if you do TDC depress to gain the track, you can still press the multi-function switch down to drop the track and stay in Twiz. So the difference is if I use the auto acquisition switch, I will drop into search mode. And if I use the coolie switch to do it, I will drop into track while scan mode. The last thing I can do here, we already talked about it, but I'm talking about it again, is if you do auto acquisition switch aft, you'll go into single target track. All right, knowing all that, let's put this into practice. We're coming up on some Sukhoi 27s, it looks like, according to the RWR. We have them on the scope right now. They're about 40 miles out, about 42, 43 miles out. We're going to let them kind of fly at us. I think there's 4 contacts there from the looks of it. Potentially. It should be a 4 ship. So we're going to let that go. We're going to IFF them really quick just to make sure we don't get any returns. There are no returns. Go figure. They're all bad. And it looks like they're starting to turn cold. They might be hitting the end of their patrol area. So it would be nice to be able to catch them. We're not up very high. Let's get some altitude and I'll tank the elevation a little bit while we do it. These guys are getting in pretty close. So I am going to see where we're at missile-wise. So I'm going to go multifunction switch up. That way they don't get alerted that we are aiming at them. And yeah, it looks like they're going to turn around and go cold. So they're at the end of their patrol route. That's okay. They're probably going to turn around and come back at some point. You'll see now that they're going, the rate of closure is -40 because they're going cold. So if we go up, this guy's -70. He's going cold. And you can see I'm kind of like switching between them by using that multifunction switch up repeatedly. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop this track by doing multifunction down so that I stay in Twiz. And I see a 20 over here. So let's go see if we can't figure out what that is. This guy might actually be way too far out for us. We're going to bump our azimuth out to about 60 degrees. To see if that helps. I have it offset to the left because according to my RWR, this guy's at like roughly 11 o'clock. We're going to do auto acquisition switch depress because I want to range out a little bit. I think he's further out than what I'm giving him credit for. And I know he's not at -20,000 feet, so I'm going to change my antenna elevation a little bit. Now it says he's off the nose. There he is. I got his data brick. So he's roughly 70 miles away. So let's go ahead. Oh, he's jamming too. These little bars that come up here let us know that he's jamming. So I'm going to go back into Twiz, but I don't want to lock him up. I don't want to alert him. So I'm going to do TDC Depress. I'm going to hold that auto acquisition switch aft. And I know he's over here somewhere. I know that because of the jamming bars. So I kind of put those within my azimuth. And here he goes. We will do the coolie switch up. That's great. Our rate of closure, it looks like he's turning around too. We're going to come out of burner and save some fuel. It looks like he's turning around too just by rate of closure. So he has gone cold. So we'll do coolie switch down. He has gone cold. We're going to circle back over and see if we can't look at those original targets that we had this direction. Unfortunately, all targets in the mission went cold on us immediately as we got within 40 nautical miles of them. So I don't have any good footage of us chasing them down and getting a shot, but that example shows just a typical workflow I have when using the radar in the F-15C. If you like the video, you know what to do. Like the video. If you want to see more like it, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.